Let's grow, church. Well, we are in week 2 of our current sermon series entitled Decide to Pre-Decide, where we're being challenged to pre-decide before a decision ever has to be made. So if you missed it last week, I want to encourage you to go to YouTube, search for East Cross Church, look for Decide to Pre-Decide 1, Claim Your Life, and just watch that message that's on there. And I want to encourage you to do this because last week's message was the first in a long line that's going to be happening here. And if you missed last week, then you're going to be kind of just a little bit behind because that one set the tone for where we're moving forward. So I want to encourage you once again, go check out YouTube and you can watch it there. But this morning, just so we're all on the same page, I do want to give just a brief summary of what we talked about last week, just to set up our conversation for today. So in week 1, Claim Your Life, we learned that our brains make between 33,000 and 35,000 decisions a day, with most of those decisions being made subconsciously to keep our brains from absolute overload, right? Can you imagine having to think through 35,000 decisions? I'm trying to think if I can make 5 and I can't even do that. So there we go, right? But 35,000 decisions. So our minds work on a set system of values that are core to who we are, right? That's where our minds come from. So our brains store what we value, what we view as good and virtuous as well as bad and wicked. Our mind stores that based on our past decisions, based on the things that we input into our brain. Our brains store this information to make decisions without intentional thought. And so if this is the case, then you can see why it is so imperative to invite God into the decision-making process early, right? Long before we have to make any decisions, we need to invite God into our decision-making. So this is the message of Proverbs 16:3. This was our core verse from last week. It's also going to be the core verse throughout this series, right? So Proverbs 16:3 says, "Commit to the Lord whatever you do, and he will establish your plans," right? Commit to the Lord whatever you do, and he will establish your plans. Proverbs 16:3 encourages us to decide to pre-decide, to commit your ways to the Lord in everything that you do, right? Everything. Decide to commit it all to the Lord, and God will establish your plans. God will be in that decision-making process. Your pre-decision to commit to God allows God into the decisions that you have to make in the moment, right? The conscious one and the subconscious ones. So by doing this, we can combat the things that influence the bad decisions that we might make. So we talked about 3 things last week that kind of add to this decision process that we have, and they're not good things, right? One is decision fatigue, right? It's the idea that after making so many decisions, right? Decision after decision after decision, your ability to make more and more decisions over the course of the day becomes worse, right? You don't have the brain capacity really to go ahead and continue to make amazing decisions all the day long. That's the first thing. The second thing we talked about is indecision. And that indecision is actually a decision, right? Indecision is actually a decision. You are deciding not to do anything. So indecision is a decision. And the third thing is not letting our emotions dictate the decisions, right? Not allowing the emotions of the moment to dictate decisions that'll be long-lasting, right? So we have to process through all of this because we have to remember that our lives are a series of decisions. Your life is a series of decisions. And the quality of our decisions determines the quality of our lives. And this is why deciding to pre-decide is so important, right? Well, today we're going to look at for instance, right? We're going to look at an example. We're going to look at an issue where deciding to pre-decide is needed. Today we're going to talk about temptations. Not the temptations, not the Motown supergroup, right? We're not talking about them, but we're talking about temptations, those things that attract us, that tempt us to do things that we most likely shouldn't. Now, I literally said that we're not going to talk about the temptations, but I just want to let you know, I went on a deep dive this week into the temptations because I'll be honest with you, my brain just kind of went there and I just kept going and kept going. Well, on this deep dive, I really wanted to find out more about the name, right? The temptations. I mean, how do you just name your group the Temptations? I mean, why do you do that? Now, I don't know if you know who the Temptations are, and everybody know who the Temptations are? For those of you who don't know, they're the ones that sing My Girl, right? Talking about, you know that song? Oh, I love that song. Oh, it's a great song. Or The Way You Do the Things You Do, or Treat Her Like a Lady, right? So just so you're prepared for trivia night, the name The Temptations was not their first name as a group. It wasn't. In fact, there were two separate groups. They were the primes and the distants, D-I-S-T-A-N-T-S, right? So the prime and the distance. Well, the prime spun off a female group called the Primettes. You guys have heard their songs, right? You haven't heard their songs? Have you heard of the Supremes? That was their name before. So you got a twofer right there, okay? So when those come up in trivia night, give me a text, say, hey, Chad, thank you. I just won $1 million, and I'm going to share it with you, okay? So just put that on there. So anyway, so the distance and the primes merged to become the Elgins, and the Elgins was the first name of the Temptations. Well, Berry Gordy, the man at Motown, told them there was another group called the Elgins, so they had to look for another name. So the group landed on the name the Temptations based on the suggestion of a few in their inner circle, including Miracle Records employee Billy Mitchell and songwriter Mickey Stevenson. And that's the story. That's all there is to it. I was so intrigued, right? I was hoping for like this True Hollywood story, or this TMZ behind the scenes expose with some great history, but it turns out literally someone said, hey, the Temptations. The rest of them said, hey, that sounds good. And that's it. So I just wanted you to share in my frustration for the week. So thank you for doing that, right? Oh, the more you know. Anyways, so let's get into what we're talking about. On to temptations and how we can say goodbye to them. Well, temptation, once again, is the desire to do something, especially something wrong or unwise. That's according to dictionary.com. Now, I would tell you, like I said, I spent a lot of time in the temptation area this week, looking at the word of temptation this week, let's put it that way. I spent a lot of time really kind of exploring this topic. And I usually take Wikipedia with a grain of salt. But their definition of temptation was fantastic. It really was. It said, temptation is a desire to engage in short-term urges for enjoyment that threatens long-term goals. Did you hear that, church? Temptation is a desire to engage in short-term urges for enjoyment that threatens long-term goals. So in the context of some religion, temptation is our inclination to sin, right? It's that bend towards sin that we have. Temptation also describes the coaxing or inducing a person into committing such an act by manipulation or otherwise of curiosity, desire, or fear of losing something important to a person. Now, that's a pretty good definition, right? That's a pretty solid definition. And I tell you, once again, I love that first part. Temptation is a desire to engage in short-term urges for enjoyment that threatens long-term goals. And I think that defining temptation this way really helps to frame the conversation. I mean, think about it. Say that your New Year's resolution was to lose weight, right? And you've been doing good. You're 19 days in. You're doing pretty good, right? But then you go to Chili's, right? And there on that Ziosk, you know what I'm talking about? I say the Ziosk, that little machine that you pay on right there on the table. You see right there on that Ziosk, you see a picture of the molten chocolate cake. You guys know what I'm talking about, right? I mean, am I the only one? I mean, seriously, come on, right? That spongy cake with the hot fudge and the caramel topped with just a scoop of that, the best vanilla in the world. I don't know how they do it, but the best vanilla ice cream in the world. And then it's got that hard shell over the top of it. You guys know what I'm talking about, right? How many of y'all seen it? How many of y'all had it? I had one this week just for sermon prep. I'm just going to admit it. I did, all right? So that's temptation, right? It's calling to you. It's on that screen. It's calling to you. It's luring you in. If they could pump smell out of that little machine, they would, right? I mean, they really would. So now you have to decide if you're going to give in or if you're going to resist, right? If you have the cake, then yeah, it's probably not going to completely destroy your goals, but it is going to set you back, right? It's going to set you back because you got to spend about another 3 hours on the treadmill working it all off, right? I mean, so it is going to have an effect. But here's the thing. See, giving in to simple temptations like this, right? Just a simple temptation. It opens the door for more similar temptations to win as well. Remember, your brain is storing the information, and you said, hey, I went ahead and had the molten chocolate cake. It was fantastic. I felt great all day long because I had the molten chocolate cake. And your brain's saying, hey, next time we go to Chili's, guess what? We're going to try the Reese's pie because it's the next thing that they're talking about, right? We're going to do that. So it's easier for your brain to make these little decisions. We've got to remember that our brains are storing and making decisions based on our values without much intentional thought. This is one of the main reasons why so many New Year's resolutions fail. I mean, think about it, right? Think about all the resolutions that you have made and not kept. I mean, it's not like you woke up one day and you said, you know what? I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm going to decide today that I don't want to lose weight. I'm going to decide to give it all up, right? We don't do that. Instead, what do? We make small little decisions along the way that plot our course and lead us into the future. So last week I shared with you all that a big temptation in my life is my chair at home. It's a big temptation, right? I walk in the door because I park, I come in the garage, and as soon as I walk in, I turn in and I can see my chair. I can see it. I like the relaxation and the comfort it offers me, especially when I turn on the massager and the heat features. I love that. And when I see that chair, the first thing that I want to do is I want to take my shoes off. I want to grab my blanket. I want to plop down for a few hours, just losing time, right? Watching TV or playing Royal Match or Royal Kingdom on my phone. And when I do this, I don't go out and work out. I don't do the things around the house that I need to get done. And so I've begun to see that this is a temptation for me. And now I have to work to not give in. Because giving in stops me from reaching my goal of coming alive in 25. Now, I'm not saying that I'm never going to sit in the chair. I'm not saying that I'm never going to watch TV. I'm not saying that I'm never going to play Royal Match or Royal Kingdom. But family, these things in and of themselves, they're not bad, right? They're not bad. But just like the chocolate molten cake at Chili's, they can become temptations if we're not prepared. We have to pre-decide how to handle the temptations. We have to do that. And let's face it, temptations are everywhere. They're everywhere. They're not just at home. They're not just at restaurants, but right there in your pocket or purse is one of the big problems that we have. Did you know that over 86% of Americans carry with them a device that offers more temptation with a single click than past generations have faced in a lifetime? If you don't know what I'm talking about your smartphone. If you got a flip phone, you're probably okay. Right? But I'm talking about your smartphone. Think about it. So say you want to be more financially secure, right? That's your goal. You want to be more financially secure. But Amazon literally is calling or texting or messaging or emailing and sending you push notifications. They're calling to you. They're tempting you. And so you give in and you shop all day long and buy things that no one ever needs, like a metal jar of dehydrated water. It's on there. Literally, the instructions say, just add water. That's what the instructions say. I'm not kidding. Or maybe cargo socks. Yes, cargo socks. Think cargo shorts with lots of pockets, but in sock form, right? Think about that, right? And I hear they go great with flip-flops. I'm just telling you. In fact, there's a picture of them right there on the box. The temptation to buy is so strong. And this is why U.S. credit card debt has risen to over $1.17 trillion at an average interest rate of 21.7% as of the third quarter of 2024. Another example. Say you want to be more productive at work and at home. But once again, that little device is filled with time wasters, right? Social media, shopping, eBay, games, entertainment, so much more. Or maybe you say you want to be dedicated to your marriage. But that little brick offers temptations like pornography and secret hookup apps. It's a tool. Your cell phone is a tool. In and of itself, it's not bad or good. But it can be a source of so much temptation. But before you think, hey, you know what? It's all the phone's fault, right? If I just get rid of my phone, then I'm never going to have any of these temptations. Before you think that, know that temptations like these have been around for years, basically since the beginning of time. Your cell phone just makes it a little bit more easier. You see, the truth is temptation is going to come. But just like those since the beginning of time, God has made a way for us to overcome. The Apostle Paul says it like this in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, in verse 12 and 13. He says this, so if you think you're standing firm, be careful that you don't fall, right? If you think you're standing firm, be careful, don't fall. Then he goes on and says, no temptation has overtaken you except what is common to mankind. And God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear. But when you are tempted, he will also provide a way out so that you can endure it. You see, here's the thing. No temptation that you face is new. It might be in a different package, but it's not new. For millennia, humanity has faced temptation and either given into it or they have overcome it. But what I want you to know today is that there is power over temptation, and that power comes from God. We need to pre-decide that when temptation comes, that we're not going to let it overtake us. We need to be ready. We need to be on guard. We need to know that the devil is on the prowl and just looking for the smallest of windows to do what he does. And what does he do? Well, the beginning part of my focus verse for the year, John 10:10, says this. It says the thief, talking about the devil, the thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. That's his job. That's what he does. But I, Jesus, have come that they may have life and have it to the full. You see, in just this one short verse, we see that one gives life and the other takes it away. James 1:13-15 tells us that when tempted, no one should say that God is tempting me, for God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he tempt anyone. But each person is tempted when they are dragged away by their own evil desires and enticed. Then after desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin. And sin, when it is full grown, gives birth to death. James tells us that God will never tempt us, right? So therefore, the devil is the tempter and is looking for every opportunity to cash in on your evil desires, those things that are already in us, which when we act upon leads to sin and leads to death. And if this is the case, church, then before temptation ever comes our way, we need to pre-decide how we're going to handle it, right? We need to know that. You see, I think we need to be prepared to handle temptation like Joseph. So we can learn from the example of Joseph. Please turn with you in your Bibles to Genesis, the very first book of the Bible, Genesis chapter 39. Now, you might remember Joseph, right? You remember him probably from Sunday school, right? Especially his coat of many colors, right? Given to him by his dad. Basically, his dad's way of saying, hey, this is my favorite, right? Which made all of his brothers super happy, right? And then all of his brothers did what in their super happiness? They sold him into slavery, right? So needless to say, they weren't all that happy. So Joe finds himself now a slave in Egypt, where he's eventually purchased by a man named Potiphar. And Potiphar is one of Pharaoh's head guys, right? Potiphar's up there. Well, Joe is put to work in Potiphar's house, and before long, he is the head guy of Potiphar's house. So let's pick up the story in verse 6 of Genesis 39. Verse 6 of Genesis 39. Listen for the word of the Lord. It says, so Potiphar left everything he had in Joseph's care. With Joseph in charge, he did not concern himself with anything except the food he ate. He must have been a picky eater. Now, Joseph was well-built and handsome. Once again, if you're having a problem envisioning that, just look at me. I'm right here, okay? And after a while, his master's wife took notice of Joseph and said, come to bed with me. But he refused. With me in charge, he told her, my master does not concern himself with anything in the house. Anything he owns, he has entrusted to me. No one is greater in this house than I am. My master has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How then should I do such a wicked thing and sin against God? So leave your Bibles open. We're going to come back to that here in just a minute. But basically what we just heard is that Joe has been entrusted with the whole of Potiphar's house. Joseph's got free reign, right? And he has worked hard to earn this level of trust. And then along comes Potiphar's wife, led by her burning lust for Joe. She's seeking an opportunity to have an affair. Now, while it does not explicitly mention that Joe pre-decided that he would say no to temptation, his actions suggest that he did. I mean, look what he does when she first approaches him, right? First of all, he has already taken inventory of the situation. He knows what's at stake: his job, his reputation, the trust that he had built, quite possibly his own life, and more than all of that, his relationship with God could be at stake. This is the first pre-decision that we need to decide, right? We need to pre-decide to examine the cost. Like I said, Joe knew what was at stake. He knew what could go wrong. He knew what he valued. He knew what was most important to him. And as such, he was prepared when temptation came. Now, I'm going to tell you, family, it is hard. It is hard to examine the cost of a decision in the moment of temptation, because all you see is the temptation, right? It's very hard to do that. If it were easy to walk away, then it wouldn't be a temptation at all. So long before the moment ever comes, we need to examine the cost and ask the question, what's the worst thing that could happen? So going back to our three illustrations that I used moments ago: overspending, wasting time, and sexual desire. What is the worst thing that can happen if you give in to temptation to overspend? What's the worst thing? The worst thing is you could probably literally ruin your family by having no money for the essentials, for food, for house, for utilities, for transportation. Sure, you might have a lot of really nice stuff, but you're not going to have any place for it. What's the worst thing that can happen if you give in to the temptation to waste time? I mean, procrastination goes to a whole new level at that point, right? You get behind in the things that for which you are responsible, right? You're getting behind in getting those done. If you're wasting time at your job, you might not have that job much longer. The things that you needed to get done around the house remain undone. And since they've remained undone, now there's new problems that creep up because of it, right? So say that your downspout is backed up, and you don't go clean the downspout out, so what happens? All the water starts coming around the side. Next thing you know, your soffit is all rotten out. And now that the soffit's all rotten out, it starts to affect the rest of everything going down, especially the columns. So at the base of your columns, everything's starting to rot out right there. Am I the only one that's happened to? All right, I might be the only one, okay? So things happen, right? Or what's the worst thing that can happen if you give in temptation and you act on your sexual desires? If you're married, it could cost you your family. It maybe cost the other person their family if they're married. It could lead to pregnancy. You could lose your job. I mean, are you starting to follow me here, church? Simply put, every decision we make has a consequence. And we need to weigh the risk and the reward long before we ever make a decision. Church, if we're going to say goodbye to temptation, then the first thing we need to do is to pre-decide to count the cost. Well, let's get back to the story of Joe and Potiphar's wife. So having pre-decided to count the cost, Joe says no. And it's simple for him, right? Joe's like, nope, not going to do it, right? It's an easy choice for him. He says no. But then we got this proverbial forbidden fruit, right? She just could not leave Joe alone. She wanted what she couldn't have. So verse 10 says that she pursued him. And this is where we get our second pre-decision that's going to help us say goodbye to temptation. So let's look back at verse 10. Verse 10 says this, and though she spoke to Joseph day after day, he refused to go to bed with her or even be with her, right? Joe refused to go to bed with her or even be with her. I mean, the best he could, working in Potiphar's house, he pre-decided that if temptation is there, then I need to remove myself from it the best that I can, right? I don't want to be around that. I need to put some distance between her and I. I need to move that line that I'm not going to cross. I need to move that farther and farther away from any possible temptation. So he pre-decided that he wouldn't even be with her, not to put himself in that situation. You see, family, long before temptation comes our way, we need to pre-decide to do the same thing, to move the line that we're not going to cross farther and farther and farther away from any possible temptation. If overspending is your temptation, freeze your credit card, literally, right? Get a cup, put water in it, put your card in it, put it in the freezer. I mean, you know how hard it is and how long you have to wait at that point to be able to get your card out of there? You got to do some work at that point. But I know we're in the digital age, right? We're in the digital age. And so it's a little different, but basically what you have to do is you have to remove all of the stored cards that you have on your phone or on your computer. So shopping with just one click won't be possible. If your temptation is wasting time, especially time on your phone, set a timer. Do the things that parents can do for their kids. Set screen time, right? It's easy. Navigate to your phone settings, find the digital well-being or the screen time option, depending on your device, Android or iPhone, right? And in there, you can set time limits for individual apps or categories, allowing you to monitor and manage how much time you spend on your phone each day. If your temptation is more in line with Potiphar's wife, then find an accountability partner and be honest with them. Right? Let them know what the struggles are. Talk to them about it. If the phone or your computer is a problem for you in this area, then download apps like Covenant Eyes or Bark, right? Bark, literally like the sound a dog makes or what trees are covered with, bark, right? Bark can actually help you with a lot of the temptations on your phone or on your computer, and I know many people who use it. So if you want more information about those, see me after church. But what I want you to know is there are ways for us to move that line so that we don't even come close to the temptation. But we have to decide to pre-decide to do it. And as we turn to the story of Joe once more, we see the final way to say goodbye to temptation. verses 11 and 12. It says, one day he went into the house to attend to his duties, and none of the household servants were inside. She caught him by his cloak and said, come to bed with me. But he left his cloak in her hand and ran out of the house. She would not give up. Potiphar's wife would not give up. She picked the right time, right? Joe's at work. There's no one around. It's time to make the move. Well, from Joe's standpoint, all this would make it easier for him to give into, right? It really would. I mean, I'm just doing my thing, right? My job's to take care of everything in the house. She lives in the house, and there's no one around, right? So no one's going to report back to Potiphar what happened. She hit on me first, right? So it would have been easy for Joe to say yes. But what does Joe do instead? Joe literally makes a break for it, right? He runs out of the house. He literally flees from temptation. In fact, he flees so quickly that he leaves his coat in her hands. He's gone, right? Every time I read that, I imagine those cartoons, right, where they're running so fast and they take off and all their clothes and shoes and stuff are back here. That's what I see when I read this. Joe is gone. Now, the rest of the story is that even though Joe did the right thing, he winds up paying an awful price. Sometimes that can even happen to us. Remember that I said our decisions have consequences. Well, other people's decisions do as well. They can have consequences for us. In Joe's case, Potiphar's wife lied about Joe. And Potiphar believed her, and Joe ends up in jail. But if you know the rest of the story, God blessed Joe, and he became the second in command in all of Egypt. He's in a position even higher than Pharaoh. But going back to that moment, Joe literally said goodbye to temptation by pre-deciding to have an exit strategy. If she places a hand on me, I'm out. I know all the exits in the house, and I'm going to use them. So let me ask you, church, what is your exit strategy? How are you going to flee when temptation rears its ugly head? Remember 1 Corinthians 10:13 from earlier? God will not let you be tempted more than you can bear, and he, God, will provide you a way out. God will provide a way out. Just like you and I, we can, just like Joseph, we can't predict what temptation will come our way. We can't predict when it will come our way. But we can know that it's going to come our way. It's going to happen. So my way out is to pray for a way out. If it's God who's going to offer us a way out, then I have to decide in the moment to pray. This is the wisdom that Jesus offers the disciples in the Garden of Gethsemane as he's praying for the strength to continue towards the cross, right? I mean, you remember this. He's in the garden. He's back there. He's praying. He asks the disciples to stay awake while he's praying. So Jesus comes back and he finds them asleep. And so what does Jesus tell them? Matthew 26:41 tells us, it says, watch and pray. Watch and pray so that you will not fall into what, church? Temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. So watch and pray. Jesus is saying, keep your eyes on me and pray for the strength to overcome temptation. Pray for an out so you don't give in. Pray for an out so that you don't give in. I will tell you, church, when you are faced with temptation and you have pre-decided that you're going to commit to God all your way to let him establish your plans, then going to God in prayer in the moment of temptation is a game changer. It literally puts everything in perspective and makes it so much easier to walk away from temptation. You see, family, none of us are immune from temptation. None of us. I mean, even Jesus, the devil tried to tempt Jesus there in the desert. And he tried to do it when Jesus was at his weakest point. But Jesus overcame temptation, and so can we. But to do it, we have to decide to pre-decide what we do long before it arrives. If we're going to say goodbye to temptation, then we need to pre-decide to examine the cost. What would the possible fallout be from this decision? What are the consequences? We need to pre-decide to move that line that we're not going to cross. If you know what your weaknesses are, right, and you should know your weaknesses. If you know what your weaknesses are, if you know what tempts you, then back that line a little farther up. That way you're not even come close to it, right? You're never even going to encounter it because you're so far away. And we need to pre-decide to plan our exit strategy. And the best resource for that is to lean in on the promise of God to provide a way out and to go to God in prayer. You see, church, we can say goodbye to temptation if we pre-decide to do so. But the question is, are you ready to do that? Are you ready to commit your ways, to commit everything that you do to the Lord and let God establish your plans to the point that when temptation comes, it's not really even a temptation because you've changed those core values that your decision-making process is based in. And so I ask you, church, are you ready to flee from temptation? Are you ready to say goodbye to temptation? Are you ready to pre-decide to do so? Let's pray.